Bruce Gordon, author of the book, The Spirit of Attack. This is the story of the first time that I nearly killed myself while flying, but it wouldn't be the last. I learned to fly the T-33 single-engine two-seat jet trainer at Laredo Air Force Base, Texas. This is what we called our hero picture, the picture taken when I first arrived in the squadron, and they had it on file really in case I got killed, so they would have something to send home to the hometown newspaper. The T-33 was a very reliable plane for its day, very stable, but I watched my first airplane crash while I was there. The airplanes had a tendency to throw turbine blades through the side of the aircraft, and the electronics were vacuum powered and not very reliable. I climbed into the tailpipe of a T-33 and had the crew chief take a picture of me, a young, happy lieutenant ready to take on the world. My instructor was flying at this moment, and so I was able to look over my shoulder and take a picture of our students flying in formation in the T-33. I finished my T-33 training in 1958, but I had to wait a little while until my F-86 training would begin. They gave me flying duties to improve my skills. One of these was a target mission for interceptors. I flew from Laredo up through Arizona and on over into California to land at McClellan Air Force Base. Those were the days before the EPA, the Environmental Protection Administration, cleaned up our exhausts and industrial pollution, and a combination of fog and smoke called smog would often fill the entire Sacramento Valley of California. In this case, it was particularly bad. When I got to the high key, which is where I was going to start my approach to the field, they reported that it was about 3/4 of a mile in visibility in smog, and it went right down to the ground. Very poor. I could hear on the radio that there was a lot of airline traffic, and I had to hold in a pattern waiting for my position in traffic while my fuel was getting rather low. As I came onto my fix on my navigation, I noticed that when I made turns, my heading indicator would swing a little bit. It was doing what they call compassing. We had learned a lot about compasses in our training, and the compass had some very interesting characteristics. If you were turning from north, for instance, toward the east, it would lag. It wouldn't start turning until after you had started your turn. On the other hand, if you were turning from the east toward the south, it would be ahead of you. It would start to go a bit faster than you did. So the compassing meant that my heading indicator was either delaying or it was ahead of what I was doing. And I didn't realize that what that meant was that the gyros in my heading indicator had lost power and that my gyros were slowing down. Normally the gyros got rid of that compassing, and we didn't have any compassing. So I was noting that there was a problem, but didn't really understand what the problem was. The compassing wasn't too bad, so I said nothing about it, and I was glad when they finally told me to start my approach. I was about 20,000 feet. I turned to my heading on the letdown charts and pulled back my power to about 80%, dropped my speed brakes, and started down. And soon I was entering into a thick layer of smog. Well, I was on instruments and I knew how to do instruments, so I started what was a big teardrop-shaped turn to the starboard, to the right, and I was dropping down to an approach altitude, coming down pretty fast, and about this time, this gyroscoping got pretty bad, and pretty soon I was unsure of what my heading was. I got down to my altitude and I thought I was heading in the right direction, and I called it in at the outer fix, and I was turning onto the runway heading, but I didn't know just exactly what my heading was. Already as low as I was authorized to be at that part of the approach, but I couldn't see anything but gray smog, nothing. So I thought, well, I'll go down just a little bit and see if I can get under this stuff. So I continued to descend a little bit to see what I could break out and see, and what I saw beneath me was that I was in the middle of some tall buildings. I was right in the middle of a city. Oh, I pulled back up into the smog, and now I looked to my ILS, my instrument landing system. Now that little gauge has, first of all, it doesn't use the heading indicator. It uses signals transmitted from the airport. It has two items. There is a localizer beam, which you set up as the heading of the runway, and it leads you down the center of the runway. Then there is a glide slope, which is can be above you, and at the point where it comes down, as it comes down toward the field, the glide slope comes down, and when it's right in the middle, you're on the glide slope, and if you follow that and keep those two crossed, you will come right to the end of the field. First, I had to intercept that localizer beam, which was off to the side. And I knew that if I was on my right heading, that would come over toward the center. But if I wasn't on my heading, I could be going away from it. I didn't know what my heading was. I looked up, and we have what we called our whiskey compass, the old compass that mariners have used for 1,000 years. And we call it the whiskey compass because it was floating in a alcohol solution. So it just sat there and bobbled around, and it turned and did strange things. But I tried to get a heading off the whiskey compass to try to intercept the localizer beam. Sure enough, I finally found the localizer beam, and I was able to get onto it, turning onto it and keeping myself on the localizer beam. And pretty soon I saw the glide slope coming down, and it came down, and when it crossed, I put my gear down and I started my final approach into the field. I was very glad. It was terrible smog, and I finally saw the field just before coming in to land. I landed and taxied in, and I was covered with sweat, wondering how I had managed to survive that thing. Oh, during the whole thing, the ground control was asking me report over to such and such fix. Well, I had no idea where any of those fixes were, and I was too busy trying to survive. One of my lessons from pilot training was that first you fly the airplane, you aviate, then you communicate. So first I was flying, and I just told those guys I was over their fix. I didn't care where it was. I was just over it, and I managed to get there. I got down on the ground, and I landed and taxied off and put everything away. And then I learned that the airplane behind me had crashed in the smog. I was just so lucky as a young pilot to survive my first real crisis.